Whatever disagreements we may have, we stand united in our commitment to uphold democracy, to protect all our people from harm.
Tom Parker Bowles had already reached for the thick envelope when King Charles III said the 6 words that changed the entire room. "That is not addressed to you." Tom's hands stopped dead in midair. Camilla looked at Charles in complete shock. Prince William looked down at the mahogany table with an icy stare. But Prince Edward did not move. He already knew exactly whose name was written inside. The ultimate royal betrayal had just begun. The strange part of this tense gathering inside Windsor Castle was not that King Charles had finally made a definitive decision. Everyone sitting in that heavily guarded, suffocating room knew a huge decision was coming fast. The strange part, the utterly devastating part, was what Charles had aggressively removed just minutes before putting his royal ink on the parchment. It was one single paragraph, 7 heavily guarded lines, a secret, long-standing promise that Queen Camilla's family had reportedly spent years believing would permanently protect their elevated place inside the inner royal circle long after Charles was gone. Now, it had completely vanished. There was no polite explanation offered. There was no soft replacement negotiated. There was just a thick, aggressive black line drawn violently through the future they thought had already been unconditionally secured. But that was only the very first shock of the evening, because when Charles finally slowly pushed the heavy envelope across the polished mahogany table, it did not stop in front of the heir, Prince William. It did not stop in front of Camilla. It stopped squarely in front of the overlooked brother, Prince Edward. Suddenly, the cold, terrifying reality of the situation crashed down upon Camilla. She finally understood that this private, high-stakes meeting was absolutely not about keeping the blended family together in harmony. It was about ruthlessly deciding who would still belong when Charles could no longer shield them. The room had been prepared with an almost uncomfortable, chilling precision. 4 heavy crystal glasses of water were placed perfectly. A red leather official government document box sat in the center. 2 serious palace lawyers were seated silently against the far wall. Princess Anne sat beside the roaring fireplace, completely silent, straight-backed, her sharp eyes watching every single movement in the room. Camilla had confidently entered the room, believing this was just another standard discussion. She thought it was another routine round of private, flexible negotiations that could easily be softened later over a glass of wine at dinner. But Anne had not come to Windsor for dinner. William had deliberately not brought Catherine, and Edward had arrived entirely alone. That obvious absence of spouses should have been her first warning sign. Charles looked deeply, profoundly tired, but there was absolutely nothing uncertain or wavering in his firm voice. The papers resting in front of him had already been marked with his final intent. His royal signature ribbon was placed exactly beside the final binding page. Even the silent witnesses had been carefully, deliberately chosen. The fierce, unspoken argument was completely over before Camilla even had the chance to sit down. She did not know it yet. Did Charles do the right thing by secretly meeting William first, before even telling Camilla there was going to be a meeting at all? Comment yes or no below right now. If you believe Charles was right to put the future of the monarchy above Camilla's feelings, don't stay silent. Like this video, share it with every royal supporter you know, and subscribe right now to Royal Daily Report. Every like and every share tells YouTube to push this story forward, instead of letting what happened inside that Windsor room stay buried forever. If the truth deserves to be heard, prove it before the next revelation. Tom Parker Bowles tried to laugh to ease the heavy tension in the room. His laugh was nervous and echoed off the stone walls. "So, this is all very formal," he said, trying to lighten the mood. Nobody responded. The silence was overwhelming and humiliating. Then one of the serious lawyers stepped forward, opened the heavy red leather box, and took out 3 thick folders marked as confidential. The first folder had Prince William's name in bold. The second was for Prince Edward. The third folder was blank. Camilla stared at the blank folder longer than anyone expected. In the royal court, a blank cover did not mean the contents were unimportant. It meant someone's name had been removed at the last moment. But whose name was missing? Charles started with William. This made sense to everyone. William was the direct heir, the future king, and would control the monarchy's wealth. However, Charles did not give him the main document. Instead, he handed William a single thin page. This page confirmed that the final arrangement would not interfere with the line of succession or any royal property that would pass to the next reigning monarch. That was it. William read it once, his face unreadable. He folded it and placed it beside his glass. He did not look surprised or ask questions. This meant he had seen the document before. Camilla noticed this, and so did a suddenly pale Tom. Edward remained completely still and silent. Charles then reached for the blank folder. For a moment, Camilla felt her shoulders relax. Maybe the folder was hers. Perhaps the missing name was just a minor change the lawyers had made. But Charles did not hand it to her. Instead, he opened it himself, his hand shaking slightly. Inside was not a legal contract. It was a handwritten note from the late Queen Elizabeth II. It was a dying request, not a formal will. It related to one of the family's most private legacies, a place connected to the quiet years Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip spent together, away from public life. Charles read aloud the final powerful sentence. Keep it with the child who asks for the least but remembers the most. Camilla's confident expression turned to fear. Tom looked worriedly at William, who was already looking at Edward. Edward, that brother people often forget. The quiet one who has spent years staying in the background. While others grabbed attention, the brother whose stable marriage has held together while the rest of the royal family faced scandals. Yes, that Edward. Charles closed his mother's handwritten note. Then he shared what the family had been secretly fighting over for months. It was not a new crown or a grand title. It was control. Control over a private royal home, its large grounds, and Prince Philip's sensitive personal documents. This included several valuable family items that had never been added to the royal collection, and a well-funded trust set up to protect them. Edward could never sell the property, transfer it, or pass it on as inheritance to his children. But while Edward was alive, no one could take it away from him without Prince William's written approval. Camilla leaned forward. Her supportive wife act slipped completely. "And where does that leave us?" she asked. "That was the mistake." She did not say me. She said us. Charles stared at her for several long seconds before answering in a flat voice. "With what is already yours." That one harsh sentence hit harder than any shouting. Camilla had her own property, family, and financial arrangements. But she clearly expected something more from this meeting. Something royal that would last after Charles was gone. Something that could not be taken from her family when William became king. Tom, feeling the pressure, finally asked the question everyone else was avoiding. "Wasn't there supposed to be continued family access?" he asked, his voice trembling. Charles paused. Princess Anne spoke. "There was a proposal," she said, her voice cold. "Proposal, not promise." That one word changed everything. Tom looked anxiously at Charles. Charles lowered his eyes to the table, unable to meet Tom's gaze. This was the moment Camilla understood the painful truth. Her family had not made these grand expectations up. Charles had allowed them to grow. He may have even encouraged it, but he had never finished the legal paperwork. For years, vague reassurances had been shared in private conversations. Promises of holiday access and a place for Camilla's children and grandchildren during family events. There was nothing clear enough for lawyers to enforce, but nothing weak enough to stop her family from believing they were permanently welcomed. Then William found the secret draft. William asked his father a tough question. What happens when you are no longer here? A simple question from the heir disrupted the entire carefully arranged deal. William realized that after Charles's death, The ongoing access for Camilla's family would no longer be a personal favor from a loving husband. It would be a heavy legal obligation for the next king. William was not willing to accept that duty. Charles could ask him for kindness, but he could not force him into pretending to care. Someone in Camilla's camp tried to slip in a dangerous clause. Hidden in an earlier draft of the agreement was a clause allowing chosen members of Camilla's family to have permanent access for private events as long as a new family trustee approved it. This seemed innocent until it became clear who was being suggested for that role. Tom Parker Bowles. Charles crossed out that paragraph violently with thick black ink. Tom would not own the royal property, but he would control it. He could decide who could enter, when it could be used for events, and how private family documents were handled. William immediately saw the risk, but Princess Anne recognized something even worse. Prince Philip's sensitive personal papers could fall under the supervision of someone who was not his biological child or part of the royal bloodline meant to protect his legacy. At that moment, Anne stopped treating the issue lightly and brought in the palace lawyers. Camilla shot a furious look at Anne. "So this was you?" Camilla hissed, visibly shaking with anger. Anne's response was cold and emotionless. "No. This is your husband finally reading what he's about to sign." Charles flinched, not because Anne was wrong, but because she had spoken a harsh truth in front of everyone. The embarrassment in the room was impossible to miss. Here was a king surrounded by his divided family, realizing that a flawed agreement meant to keep peace could start a huge conflict right after his death. Was Princess Anne right to bring in palace lawyers the moment she discovered Tom Parker Bowles could gain control over Prince Philip's private papers? Drop your answer in the comments right now. If you think Anne did the right thing by protecting Prince Philip's legacy before it was too late, don't let this moment pass quietly. Like this video, share it with someone who follows the royal family, and subscribe now to Royal Daily Report. When viewers stay silent, Palace Spin wins. When thousands respond together, YouTube has no choice but to push the story further. But the most humiliating discovery was not just the sneaky trustee clause. There was another paper, one nobody in Camilla's camp had expected. Edward's folder included a certified copy of a private letter Prince Philip had written years ago. It was not a legal command. Philip described Edward as reliable, unshowy, and patient, the child most likely to preserve something precious without trying to turn it into power. That beautiful description changed the entire mood in the room. Charles was not rewarding Edward for demanding more power. He was honoring him for never asking for anything at all. For decades, Edward had quietly let grand titles, estates, military roles, and public attention pass him by. Andrew took the headlines. Charles became king. Edward just stayed in the background. Now, when the family needed someone to handle responsibility without seeking power, all eyes turned to the quiet brother. This was the twist Camilla's ambitious family never saw coming. They had expected strong resistance from William and Anne, but thought Edward would be harmless. Yet harmless people can become very powerful when everyone trusts them completely. During the toughest part of the meeting, Charles quietly asked the palace lawyers to leave. They gathered their papers, closed the red box, and quickly left into the hallway. However, Princess Anne stayed seated. Prince William also remained, his jaw clenched tight. Tom disagreed strongly. "If this is a private family matter, why are they still here?" he asked, raising his voice in anger. Charles looked tired. He glanced at his stepson and said, "Because they are my family." The silence that followed was heavy and painful. Tom's expression changed to anger. Camilla stared at Charles in shock, as if he had just slapped her. Charles realized too late how his words had sounded. He meant that Camilla's children were his family because of their marriage. But it came across very differently. He had spent years trying to show that the divide between royal birth and marriage did not matter. Now, at a crucial moment in his reign, it mattered greatly. Next, they moved towards signing the heavy document. But it was Prince Edward, not an angry Camilla, who almost stopped the entire process. He pushed the folder back across the table. "I don't want this if it tears the family apart," Edward said quietly. Camilla looked shocked. Tom seemed relieved, thinking they might have a second chance. Anne closed her eyes in frustration. William leaned forward aggressively. But Charles suddenly got angry, quietly but deeply. "You think refusing this duty will stop that?" Charles asked, his voice shaking with restrained rage. Edward did not respond. Charles stood up and placed his hands on the table. "This fractured family needs someone to take on this duty before it turns into a disaster." Edward glanced at the late Queen's handwritten note again. It read, "Keep it with the child who asks for the least, but remembers the most." He realized how serious this moment truly was. It was not just Charles choosing a favorite sibling. It was a king showing who he trusted to protect the royal legacy from the chaos to come. Edward opened the folder again and picked up the pen. However, Camilla was not finished. She urgently requested a delay in signing the arrangement. Could they postpone it for 6 months, a year, just long enough for the blended family to think about the emotional impact of such a strong decision? Princess Anne almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because everyone at the table understood what a delay meant in palace politics. A delay would mean more behind-the-scenes discussions, increased media pressure, and the chance for power issues to come back through unclear legal terms. Charles understood this too. He reached for the royal signature ribbon. In a surprising move, Camilla placed her bare hand over the final page to stop him. The king looked down at her trembling fingers. The room fell completely silent. When Camilla placed her bare hand over the final page to stop Charles from signing, "Do you think she crossed a line no queen consort should ever cross?" Comment your honest opinion below. If you believe Camilla went too far by trying to physically stop the king from making his final decision, don't just watch in silence. Like this video, share it with every royal supporter you know, and subscribe right now to Royal Daily Report. Every comment, every like, and every share keeps this story alive and stops palace spin from burying what really happened inside that Windsor room. "You're making it seem like my family was trying to take something that wasn't ours," Camilla said, her voice shaking. Charles replied quietly, "Then why are you trying so hard to stop me from giving it to Edward?" There was no answer. This moment marked the end of their long argument. Camilla could not say her family wanted nothing, even as they fiercely tried to keep their claim to royal power. Tom stepped back from the table, feeling completely defeated. William did not look proud at all. Instead, he looked deeply sad, as if he was watching his aging father face a mistake that William had warned him about years ago. Charles gently but firmly moved Camilla's hand from the paper. Then he signed it once, twice. A final heavy signature beneath the witness clause. Edward's role as steward became legally secure upon Charles's eventual death or retirement from the throne. William would naturally inherit the ultimate authority as king, but Edward would keep the private residence and sensitive archives for his lifetime. Princess Anne would be the first independent protector of the family papers. Camilla would keep her personal access while Charles was alive, but her children would have no automatic rights after him. They would not receive any special privileges, luxurious rooms, or key positions in the royal family. Everything they thought was secured disappeared in less than 30 painful seconds. Charles had one last important document to share. It was the blank page from the third folder. He flipped it over slowly. Camilla's full name was printed on the back. For the first time that tense evening, her expression softened slightly. Maybe Charles had secretly set up a special fund just for her. Perhaps this was the protection she had feared losing. He slid the page toward her. It was not a generous gift. It was a legal statement. Charles clearly stated that any support he gave to Camilla during his life would belong only to her. None of it could ever grant her children, grandchildren, or legal representatives any royal rights in the future. It was clear, it was final, it was strict. Tom leaned over and read the first few lines before stopping suddenly. "Why would you write this unless someone accused us of plotting something?" he asked angrily. Charles looked directly at him. "Because my silence let everyone think different things." That was the sad truth. A clever move from his wife had not betrayed Charles. He had created the family crisis himself. He had tried to keep everyone happy with vague promises. He told Camilla just enough to make her feel secure about her family's future. He told William enough to make him believe nothing permanent was happening behind his back. He avoided Princess Anne because he knew she would demand clear legal answers. He overlooked Edward because Edward never complained. But vague promises do not just disappear. They eventually create problems. Someone has to choose which version of the truth is real. Charles finally did. Camilla stood up from her chair. She was not crying or shouting. She was eerily calm. Her silence frightened everyone more than a loud argument would have. She asked Charles if he understood how this decision would look to the public. She warned him that people would say William had pressured him into it. They would say Anne had humiliated her. People would say Charles used Edward to push her family out of the palace. Charles listened quietly to her concerns. Then he said something she never expected to hear. "Let them say it." The mood in the room changed completely. For years, Charles had worked hard to control how the public viewed his complicated relationship with Camilla. Every public appearance, title, and PR decision was made with public opinion in mind. Now he was making a harsh choice that could bring back old suspicions. Why? Because he feared something worse than public embarrassment, leaving William with a messy family conflict disguised as a royal inheritance. Camilla hurried to the door, and Tom followed closely behind. Before leaving, he turned sharply to Edward and accused him. "You knew about this." Edward slowly shook his head. "I knew about a letter from my father. I didn't know what Charles would decide." Tom glared at Prince William. "You did." William did not deny it. He did not even blink. This was another blow to Camilla. Charles had spoken with William before even discussing it with her children. The future king was involved before Camilla even knew there was a meeting. Tom left, and the door closed behind him with a loud thud. Camilla stood frozen in the dark corridor. She did not walk away right away. Through the heavy wooden door, she could still hear their voices. Charles was telling Edward where Prince Philip's important papers were stored. Anne reminded everyone that the late Queen had still sealed several large boxes. William asked if security had checked the master inventory. They moved on without her. This was the painful reality of final decisions in the palace. Those affected struggle with their loss, while others start planning for the future. Inside the study, Edward looked at the signed document. He did not feel victorious. He seemed weighed down by history. Charles settled back in his chair. For a moment, he felt like just a tired brother, not a king. "You should have received something from him long ago," Charles said softly. Edward glanced at the thick folder. This isn't just something of his. He placed his hand on Prince Philip's sealed letter. "This is responsibility for all of it." Charles nodded. That was why he had chosen Edward, not for the grand residence, but because Edward understood it had little real value on its own. The true inheritance was the memory. The private letters, handwritten speech corrections, and family photographs never seen by the press. The sealed boxes held the delicate pieces of a royal marriage that had lasted over 70 years. Controlling these items meant shaping how history remembers the royal family. Camilla had selfishly worried that the decision was only about whether her children would remain welcome. William thought it was about protecting the stability of the next reign. Anne felt it was about defending her parents' legacy. But Charles saw the larger risk. If no one drew a clear line, private kindness could be mistaken for entitlement. So he drew a thick black line through 7 lines of text, crossed out one name, and wrote in Edwards. In the cold corridor, Camilla heard the red document box snap shut. It was a small sound, But it meant the conversation was over. No more secret proposals, no more private assurances, and no more waiting for Charles to change his mind. The king had made his final decision. Edward walked out first, holding the heavy folder against his chest. William followed with the late queen's handwritten note. Anne carried Prince Philip's sealed master inventory. Charles came out last, looking completely drained. Camilla watched them pass, hoping someone might hesitate or offer a kind word. No one did. Then Edward stopped beside her. For a brief moment, it seemed he might apologize for the harsh outcome. Instead, he looked her in the eye and said, "I'll protect it. Not from her, not from Tom, from everyone." That was the final humiliation. Camilla's family had spent years wondering what King Charles would leave them. But his last important decision was not about what they would receive. It was about what they would never control. As Edward walked away with the legacy he was about to inherit, Camilla remained frozen by the closed wooden door, staring at the place where her family's future had just been crossed out. Did Charles protect the monarchy by choosing Edward, or did he betray Camilla and her family by letting vague promises go on for years without ever putting them in writing? Comment yes, no, or both below. Share your honest thoughts in the comments. Remember to like, share, and subscribe to Royal Daily Report for more fearless royal investigations. Don't miss the next video. Subscribe right now so you never miss what happens behind palace gates.